Welcome back, Warner fam. Today, we're diving into a 2010 horror crime film that'll make you think twice before stepping into a cornfield, Husk. So keep your eyes wide open, and whatever you do, don't look away. The nightmare begins with 5 friends driving through the lonely backroads of Nebraska, their SUV slicing through the endless stretch of farmland. But then, bam, a swarm of crows slams into their windshield like a black wave of death, forcing them off the road. The impact knocks them out cold. When they come to, something's wrong. Johnny is gone. No footprints, no sounds, just the rustling of corn stalks in the wind. Desperate for answers, Brian and Scott push through the towering crops toward a rundown farmhouse, leaving Natalie and Chris behind at the car. The deeper they go, the heavier the silence becomes. Then, in a clearing, they see it. A scarecrow, hanging limp on a wooden frame, its stitched mouth twisted in a silent scream. The air reeks of decay. The house is just ahead, but something about that scarecrow feels wrong. Inside the rotting house, Brian and Scott creep through the shadows. Every creak of the warped floorboards echoes through the eerie silence. The walls are smeared with grime, and the air reeks of mold and something far worse. It's like the house itself is holding its breath. Back at the road, Natalie freezes. A boy, no older than 10, stares at her from the edge of the cornfield. But before she can speak, he vanishes into the stalks, swallowed by the endless green. Then, a figure catches her eye. A scarecrow sprawled beside the road. Its burlap skin is tattered, but when she leans closer, her stomach twists. The thing has teeth, human teeth. Panicked, Natalie rushes to tell Chris, but he doesn't believe her. Tears streak her face as she bolts into the cornfield, desperate to find Brian. Upstairs, Brian and Scott stumble upon a nightmare. Johnny sits hunched at a sewing machine, his body barely recognizable beneath the blood and torn flesh. The steady click, click, click of the needle fills the room. They call his name, but Johnny doesn't respond. His eyes are hollow, his face blank. Then, without warning, the machine stops. A scream tears through the air. Outside, Natalie's body is dragged away by a shadowy figure, her lifeless limbs scraping through the dirt. Chris watches in horror, powerless. The field swallows her whole, leaving only silence. Brian and Chris sprint through the maze of cornstalks, their lungs burning. Then they find her. Natalie's corpse dangles like a grotesque puppet, her eyes empty, but something stirs. A dark force slithers into her gaze, twisting what little life remains. Fueled by rage, Brian charges after the figure, leaving Chris paralyzed with fear. But as he tackles the killer, his blood runs cold. Beneath the tattered clothes and burlap mask, it's a scarecrow. A second one lunges from the shadows. Brian's scream is swallowed by the towering field as he's forced back toward the house. After regrouping, Brian, Scott, and Chris stumble through the eerie yard, their faces pale with shock. Johnny is gone. Natalie is dead. Fear coils around them like a noose. But survival demands action. Abandoned cars litter the field, their rusted frames whispering of failed escapes. Maybe one still works. Brian and Scott push open the creaking barn doors. Inside, the shadows dance with dust. That's when Scott freezes. A scene flickers before him. A towering farmer, his face twisted in rage, beating a terrified boy named Corey as his brother Alex watches. Trembling, the father's screams ring in Scott's ears. Then, just as quickly, the vision is gone. Scott staggers, his pulse racing. "Did you see that?" he gasps. But Brian shakes his head. Just empty space. No farmer, no boys, only the barn's suffocating silence. Back at the house, Chris catches a glimpse of something. The young boy, the same one from the cornfield. His pale face peeks through the shadows, then disappears. Drawn by fear and curiosity, Chris follows him upstairs. But when he reaches the room, his knees buckle. Natalie is there, dead but moving. She sits at the sewing machine, her fingers clumsily threading the needle. Her vacant eyes lock on the task, as though bound by an invisible force. The metallic hum of the machine is the only sound. Panic swallows Chris whole. He spins toward the door, but it slams shut, trapping him inside. He pounds his fists against the rotting wood, his screams muffled by the oppressive walls. Outside, Brian and Scott hear the frantic cries. They claw at the door, but it won't budge. Chris's only escape is the window. He pries it open, but as he tries to climb out, the window slams shut on his hand with a sickening crunch. He tumbles to the ground below, pain pulsing through him. Brian rushes back into the house, determined to stop whatever this is. But when he reaches the room, it's empty. Natalie is gone. Scott's mind twists once more. The barn's dark corners fade away, and a terrifying vision pulls him in. This time, Corey stands over his older brother Alex, rage and jealousy burning in his eyes. With a bone-chilling scream, Corey plunges a pitchfork into Alex's chest, the blood-soaked stalks drinking in the horror. But it doesn't end there. Corey drags Alex's lifeless body into the cornfield, dressing him in burlap and straw. The spirit of Alex, betrayed and furious, now lives on through the scarecrows. The twisted truth sends chills down Scott's spine as he's yanked back to the present. Disoriented, Scott stumbles through the field only to realize he's wandered straight into the clearing. A scarecrow jerks to life, its stitched mouth twisting in a silent snarl. It lunges at him. Scott's scream is swallowed by the rustling stalks, until Brian bursts through, pulling him free. The two sprint through the endless rows of corn, the scarecrow close behind. But just as its straw-stuffed limbs reach for them, it suddenly stops. The field's edge stands before them, the barren dirt cracked and dry. The scarecrow seethes, unable to cross. It glares with hollow eyes before vanishing into the shadows once more. Later, back at the barn, Chris paces, his nerves frayed. Brian's lost it. He growls, his voice trembling. All he cares about is finding Natalie. He pleads with Scott to leave, the old truck from the barn offering their only shot at escape. But Scott's mind is made up. Without a word, he turns back toward the house. Whatever has twisted this place, he has to face it, and Brian isn't facing it alone. In the damp, rotting cellar, Scott's trembling flashlight beam catches something. Corey's spirit, a ghostly shadow lingering in the dark. Then, with a sharp gasp, Scott and Brian find the truth. Corey's body, slumped and lifeless, a rusted gun still clutched in his hand. The blood-stained floor tells a story of regret and rage. Outside, Chris frantically works beneath the hood of the battered truck. The old engine sputters to life, and without a second thought, he barrels into the endless cornfield. But escape is a fleeting hope. The air thickens as shadows twist and shift. Alex is here, and he's no longer bound by one form. Scarecrows leap from the stalks, their empty eyes tracking Chris. He rips the mask from one twisted figure, the fabric tearing away to reveal a nightmare underneath. Johnny's lifeless face. Brian bursts from the field, his face smeared with sweat and fear. But when the scarecrow that was once Natalie steps forward, he hesitates. Her dead eyes seem to plead, and Brian can't pull the trigger. In a heartbeat, she strikes, and Brian crumples, lifeless in the dirt. Chris and Scott stagger back to the house, the crushing weight of loss dragging behind them. But amidst the despair, Scott pieces it together. He can only control one at a time, he murmurs. The truth becomes clear. Whenever Alex possesses a corpse, he's powerless elsewhere. With this knowledge, a plan takes shape. Gasoline, fire, burn the field to ashes. But Alex is no fool. Before Scott and Chris are ready, the scarecrows come, dozens of them. Limbs flail, straw flies. Chris fights with feral desperation, taking them down one by one. Gritting his teeth, he and Scott agree to split up. One final gamble for survival. Chris charges toward the road, lungs burning. But from the shadows, the twisted, undead form of Brian lunges. Chris screams as he's slammed against the rusted fence. The sharp metal bites deep. Gasping, he claws at Brian's mask, tearing it free. For a moment, he stares into the face of his friend, but another sound sends chills racing down his spine. Another scarecrow, closing in fast. Scott hears Chris's agonized cries. The fire must be lit. He drenches the field, striking a match. But before the flames can catch, the air thickens once more. Alex's original scarecrow form looms from the shadows. Without warning, it strikes, and Scott's world fades to black. Scott's eyes flutter open, the dull ache in his body a cruel reminder of what's been lost. He's back in the clearing. The twisted scaffold stands tall, and there, Chris hangs lifeless, a broken puppet in Alex's grasp. But Scott remembers. The pitchfork. It lies just within reach, its rusted prongs still stained. With a burst of desperate strength, he lunges for it and drives it deep into Alex's chest. Over and over, he stabs. But Alex, fueled by something far darker than life, rises once more. The scarecrow's hollow grin never falters. Alex closes in, but Chris, in a final act of defiance, grips the monstrous figure tight. "Run," his strained voice pleads. Scott hesitates, the weight of guilt crushing him. But as Alex's strength overtakes Chris, Scott stumbles away, heart pounding. The endless stalks blur past him, the field groaning with unseen whispers. His legs burn, lungs scream, but he doesn't stop. The road finally breaks free from the corn's grasp, a sliver of hope in the dark. He collapses, the gravel scraping against his trembling hands. Headlights beam through the shadows. A couple steps out, confusion etched across their faces as they search for answers. Scott tries to call out, but his voice fails him. Every breath is a struggle. And then, just beyond the road's edge, it moves. The scarecrow, limbs twisted and limp. It stares with cold, empty eyes. But But as the couple's gaze drifts past, it falls motionless once more, like nothing but a forgotten prop. Scott's wide, terrified eyes meet the couple's. The field is silent. The road is empty, but the horror remains. If you were stuck in a cornfield with killer scarecrows, what would you do to survive? So, which awesome movie should we recap next? And if you enjoyed this recap, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more epic movie breakdowns. We've got plenty more coming your way. Thanks for watching and see you next time. This was Warner Movie Recaps, where movies come to life.